In this Huberman Lab podcast summary, Dr. Andrew Huberman and guest Dr. Paul Conti explore the structure and function of our minds to improve our mental health. Dr. Conti unpacks the critical interaction between our subconscious and conscious mind, which drives our emotions, decision-making, and behavior. In the course of their discussion, they address key questions about mental health, outlining specific practices that can be undertaken alone or with a therapist to enhance overall mental health. For instance, listeners are guided on how to identify the most mentally healthy version of themselves and given the tools to evaluate and address their anxiety levels, confidence, self-talk, beliefs, and internal narratives. Dr. Conti introduces his framework of the structure of self and the function of self, laying out the pillars of understanding mental health. He emphasizes the need for individuals to comprehend and appreciate the relationship between their conscious and subconscious mind to bolster mental health. The main takeaway from this episode is the potency of agency and gratitude in enhancing mental health. Dr. Conti asserts that a healthy self approaches life through these lenses. Regardless of life stages or circumstances, the possession of agency and gratitude augments a person's happiness, engagement, and enthusiasm for life. According to Dr. Conti, a healthy self-structure and self-function foster empowerment and humility. Empowerment in this context refers to the ability to navigate the world effectively, while humility represents our understanding of our place within the complex world around us. Consequently, these qualities nourish our sense of agency and gratitude, creating a conducive environment for mental health. In a bid to make the concept less abstract and more relatable, Dr. Conti affirms, having agency and gratitude is the best way to approach life. He parallels this notion with commonly known metrics for physical health, suggesting that the pathway to mental health, to attain a sense of agency and gratitude, should be communicated and treasured as clearly as that to physical health. Following that analogy for actionable steps, if physical health requires a routine like cardiovascular training or strength training, mental health could depend on practices that nurture the sense of agency, gratitude, empowerment, and humility. In the podcast discussion, Dr. Huberman and Dr. Conti delve into how we guard our mental health through what they term character structures, stemming from aspects of both the conscious and unconscious mind. The guests establish that these subconscious provisions are there to defend against fear, confusion, and despair. To illustrate this point, Dr. Conti likens the mind to an iceberg. The conscious mind becomes the section visible above water, with the unconscious mind constituting a far larger submerged portion of the iceberg. This underwater body signifies the millions of subconscious processes we undertake without realizing, from biological predispositions to thought patterns developed over time. Defense mechanisms then surface from the unconscious mind, forming barriers around the conscious mind. These mechanisms are personality traits and behaviors which we use subconsciously to shield us from despair, stress, and fear. It's these unconscious habits that generate what Dr. Conti refers to as the character structures, the ways in which we automatically react to or engage with the world. These character structures guide our decisions, determining the paths our lives take. For example, if we trust easily, we may invite more opportunities but also open ourselves to risk. Meanwhile, if we are more suspicious or avoidant, we may protect ourselves, but also potentially forego opportunities. Dr. Conti argues that if a person understands their subconscious mechanics, they can foster a healthy character structure that safely engages with the world. The aim here is to protect the conscious mind while maintaining the openness necessary to pursue opportunities and establish connections, hence leading to overall improvement in mental health. This section of the podcast focuses on the importance of subconscious understanding, demonstrating how mental mechanisms can shape our character structures and guide our interactions with the world. The insights shared underline the power of the subconscious mind, emphasizing the role it plays in our overall mental health and daily behaviors. These subconscious habits that play out in conscious life are also compared to physical exercises performed to achieve better health. However, the practices needed to address mental health, such as managing our sense of agency, gratitude, empowerment, and humility, require a firm handle on both our conscious and unconscious mind. Within this section of the podcast, Dr. Conti provides a deep dive into the concept of character structures and how one's predispositions to certain behaviors and reactions to situations can reveal their character structures. It is emphasized that we all have a unique set of potentials and predispositions. For instance, the degree to which one affiliates with others or isolates oneself can be a revealing aspect of one's character structure. Humor, too, can reveal aspects of character. The use, context, and type of humor one utilizes can reveal potential defense mechanisms or inner conflicts. Further discussed is the exploration of self, how we present ourselves to the world, our known behaviors, and even the unknown aspects of our character structures. By exploring self, clinicians can gain a deeper insight into the unconscious aspects of a person's character, offering potential avenues for change. Anxiety, as Dr. Huberman brings up, can be a critical aspect to consider in the context of understanding one's character structure. It is proposed that anxiety is an innate response, keeping us vigilant and careful, however. Too much anxiety can be counterproductive. The degree of anxiety one experiences in different environment dictates how we respond to situations. Dr. Conti adds that understanding the roots of anxiety could be vital to enhance one's mental health and well-being. This could involve exploring one's natural predispositions, their genetic component, as well as past traumas or experiences that might be fueling their anxiety. Acknowledging the role of the self and its conscious and unconscious components, the conversation aims to push the idea that understanding one's predispositions can aid in improving not merely their mental health, but their overall interactions, reactions, and engagements with the world. It also underscores the role of habit formation, nurturing healthy predispositions, and understanding our unconscious inclinations to build a stronger, healthier self. During the course of this discussion, Dr. Conti delves deeper into concepts of cognitive behavioral techniques. He stresses upon understanding the conscious thought process of someone suffering from anxiety. The defensive mechanisms are addressed, and how we cope with particular situations defines the effectiveness of these defenses. Dr. Conti thereafter focuses on the character structure and highlights how our decisions and engagements in the social space can have fundamental impacts on our mental well-being. Further into this discourse, Dr. Huberman revisits the concept of confidence and relates it with our trust over our potentialities and predispositions. He defines confidence as the belief that we can handle different situations without threatening our conscious mind. The discussion is refocused on the dichotomy between self-belief and overconfidence or narcissism, showcasing a balance between self-assured predispositions and overbearing confidence. Dr. Conti adds by pointing out the state dependence of confidence. For many people, confidence is not a uniform experience, but varies with situations. This is often witnessed when people who otherwise portray high confidence become diffident in the arena of romance due to higher emotional stakes. Understanding this gap can help in constructing healthier definitions of self-confidence. Character structure, as mentioned previously, is the self built upon potentialities and predispositions. Dr. Conti reiterates that for people suffering from state-dependent confidence, understanding the state is critical. The doctor also discusses the concept of phenomenology, the study of structures of consciousness as experienced from the first-person point of view. The defense mechanism that affects consciousness, level of confidence in varying scenarios, and how the individual perceives this confidence within themselves are all factors in understanding these states and experiences in context. The dialogue is then directed towards the topic of internal narratives and beliefs. The narrative we consistently tell ourselves can have a lasting impact on our mental health. For example, constantly telling ourselves we're a loser or not good enough causes significant harm. This narrative doesn't change quickly, but it can be changed. As this shift occurs, our lives can gradually improve, a notion that is a beacon of hope in a world that craves instant gratification. The topic of anxieties about future potentialities and predispositions is discussed with the notion stressed that these anxieties can be managed, provided we understand where they stem from. Dr. Conti emphasizes that by understanding what is going on inside of us, what we make of it, and how we can increase our empowerment during the process of change, we can alter this narrative. This is significant because our brains are not hardwired, but strongly reinforced. Hence, it is possible to implement change. The conversation expands further on underlying narratives that individuals hold about themselves, discussing a hypothetical patient who, despite making significant health improvements, still carries a fear. The fear that despite their progress and positive changes, he will return to the previous unhealthy state. The negative loop in his head keeps telling him that he's in constant threat of falling back into old habits. This concept of internal narrative is core to Dr. Conti's approach to understanding what's going inside someone. Is it fear, depression, cravings, or simple foreboding joy? For instance, the cyclical worry that the current happy state can ebb away. Each narrative requires a different approach. If there's trauma, depression, or cravings, they need understanding and handling. If it's a healthy worry, reinforcement of positive actions can be the solution. The dialogue evolves into understanding self, where Dr. Conti emphasizes the need for individuals to understand where they are internally strong or weak. This introspection can be met with resistance from certain individuals, especially those who believe their primary focus should be on actions, the application, without necessarily exploring the self nor excavating any unresolved issues or traumas. Contrasting this perspective, Dr. Conti appeals to common sense by using the example of physical health. He states the importance of learning to take care of oneself, emphasizing the immense effort and knowledge it requires to maintain physical health. The same effort and systematic approach are necessary when taking care of mental health. A change can occur not instantaneously or magically, but through applying science combined with common sense. It's crucial to understand that there are two pillars on which we build our lives, the structure of self and the function of self. Self-awareness is the first aspect of the function of self. The individual must recognize that there is a distinct I separate from others, which he or she is responsible for. Following self-awareness, defense mechanisms automatically kick into gear, acting as verbs in the individual's story. Analyzing how these defenses guide behavior, such as avoiding certain situations or coping in different ways, is critical to understanding a person's mental landscape. The dialogue emphasizes that understanding these mechanisms provides the knowledge and tools necessary to reshape them, underlining the continuous interplay between self-awareness, understanding, and action in shaping mental health. The conversation expands further, delving into various defense mechanisms. Dr. Conti explains how unconscious processes acting defensively prevent us from perceiving life as it's truly happening. For example, a defense mechanism, like projection, can cause problems. It happens when someone attributes their feelings, like anger or frustration, to the external world, rather than accepting that these feelings are internal. Another defense mechanism is displacement, where anger shifts from the person causing the anger to a safer target. This unconscious shifting could, for example, lead someone to take out their work frustration on their family or pet rather than addressing the issue at work. Dr. Conti also explains a defense mechanism called projective identification, where an individual's emotional state becomes contagious to others, leading them to feel the same way. The person experiencing the emotion tends to spread anxiety or tension unintentionally, affecting the behavior of others around them. He clarifies the nuances between projection, displacement, and projective identification. Where projection is when feelings are attributed to others, displacement is when the source or target of these feelings shifts, and projective identification is when someone spreads experienced emotions onto others subconsciously. However, not all defense mechanisms have negative connotations. Dr. Conti mentions a beneficial defense known as altruism. In a negative situation, rather than propagating negativity, a person can choose to respond positively, doing something nice for the next person. Dr. Conti then discusses how humor can be a double-edged sword. While humor can diffuse tense situations and foster bonding, sarcasm can be wielded as a weapon. Sarcasm often reflects hidden aggression and may be used to assail someone. Further, cynicism is seen as a worldview defense mechanism that encapsulates a person's negative perception of the world, protecting them from feeling worse. In the next part, Dr. Conti brings up the concept of salience, our ability to focus on things that are immediately important while ignoring what is not. He notes that thousands of thoughts and ideas could vie for our attention at any given moment. Still, we're able to focus our attention where it's needed. He highlights the power of internal narratives and how they can take up our focus, often to the detriment of other things. To demonstrate this, he describes a person who loved music, but stopped listening to it because his internal narrative was so negative and pervasive that it allowed no room for any positive input. After completing a major mental shift, this person became able to enjoy music again. His internal narrative had diminished and allowed other more constructive thoughts to surface. This person then managed to completely change their life. The critical point here is the change in what was salient. He points out that what's salient to us is complicated and influenced by many factors, but is vital to our everyday lives. Near the end, Dr. Conti debates whether humans repeat patterns because we are trying to work out something specific, or whether we are deliberately creating some friction to accomplish something else. He says humans tend to do what works for them, even if that leads to repetition of unhelpful patterns. He focuses on the influence of defense mechanisms in determining salience. If an unhealthy defensive structure is in use, it will affect judgment and decision-making. However, Dr. Conti says people could change their ways if they could replicate their approach in situations where they make sound decisions. He caps it off by explaining that, more often than not, Dr. Conti says humans might re-enter problematic situations to fix what happened in the past. He coins the term repetition compulsion to describe this phenomenon. The discussion continues into exploring why individuals act the way they do, particularly around achieving their personal goals. Dr. Conti presents math as a symbolic representation of how the human mind operates, as an analytical approach can help to spot areas where personal behaviors might not align with desired outcomes. If there's consistently a carve-out, an exception to a person's overall logical actions, it piques curiosity because it often signifies a specific issue at play, such as destructive defense mechanisms or hidden subconscious motivations. To get to the root of these issues, understanding the structure and function of the self is critical. He discusses the importance of looking everywhere, or fully evaluating one's habits and behaviors. So when a problem occurs or when an individual isn't feeling as content or peaceful as they want to feel, they have multiple cupboards or resources to pull from. Self-understanding takes into account the physical I, self-awareness, defense mechanisms, what grabs our attention, salience, and the behaviors we enact every day. Importantly, Dr. Conti emphasizes the construct of strivings, our intentions and aspirations for the future. Understanding our strivings, along with utilizing self-awareness, attention to our defense mechanisms, and consciousness of our salience, ultimately helps us enact beneficial behaviors that can lead us to a better life. Dr. Huberman emphasizes that focusing on behavior only might not be enough to affect meaningful change, using the example of his friend who lost weight but still lives in fear of regaining it. There is still underlying fear because there are unaddressed issues around his salience and defense mechanisms. While behavioral change may lead to desirable outcomes at the surface level, it does not always solve deeper emotional issues, hence the vital need for holistic self-exploration and understanding. Drawing attention once again to the numerical analysis, Dr. Conti and Dr. Huberman explain that the fear faced by the aforementioned individual is doing him a disservice. The fear needs attention because most likely it can be resolved, and one must explore one's psyche to understand and alleviate such fears. In his closing thoughts, Dr. Conti reiterates the concept of character structure in the unconscious mind, and that it's crucial to maintain a sense of respect and humility during this self-exploration process. We cannot help but empower ourselves as we gain more knowledge about our mental structure and function. This approach allows us to move toward a state of agency and gratitude, ultimately bringing us the peace and contentment we desire. Dr. Conti and Dr. Huberman dive deeper into the concept of generative drive, a drive inherent in humans to create, understand, and explore. Here, Conti describes this as innate to human existence, acting as fuel that propels us forward. It can manifest in various forms, from the desire to induce change in the world to learning and curiosity about the surrounding world. Their discussion regulates two basic human drives: aggressive drives and drives toward pleasure. Far from being destructive, aggressive drives linked to our sense of agency facilitate change. Meanwhile, drives toward pleasure go beyond physical gratification. They embody the quest for relief or comfort in life, which prevent us from white-knuckling through life in constant tension. Conti introduces a compelling argument for a generative drive existing innately in humans, a drive toward curiosity, amazement, understanding, and improvement. Often, external factors, violence, lack of opportunities, trauma, and mental health issues can suppress this drive. But he argues that with health, agency, and gratitude, this drive can be nurtured and thrive. Conti connects peace, contentment, and delight, not just to this generative drive, but to action. He deviates from the traditional understanding of these three words as passive states and reframes them as states connected to actions. The generative drive, when in the forefront, harnesses aggressive drives, fueling our sense of agency, and the pleasure drives, making them serve us and the world better and yield a sense of contentment and peace. The goal is not to erase the aggressive and pleasure drives, but to dial them to the right intensities, which can be complex but realistic with a grounded understanding of the self and life. Huberman shares his personal experience with the generative drive, describing how engaging in cognitively demanding tasks each morning created a sense of satisfaction and gave him energy, a catalyst for his generative drive. Dr. Conti considers this an excellent example of how generative drives can be activated differently for different people. Knowing what works for oneself and committing to it can yield beneficial results, including alignment of the generative drive, allowing for peace, contentment, and delight. For instance, he uses the example of gardening, how returning to nurturing and cultivating a garden, ignoring the even though factors like mental health issues or other life adversities, can be an exercise in agency, leading to fulfillment, and give the generative drive space to prosper. In their discussion, they present the generative drive as a tool in personal development, a mechanism to overcome adversity, foster positive mental health, and improve overall satisfaction and contentment. Dr. Conti stresses further about the concept of generative drive and how it interacts with the aggressive and pleasure drives. The aggressive drive is often associated with destructive actions, but Conti explains that in a healthy context, it's more linked to one's sense of agency and the motivation to induce change. On the other hand, the pleasure drive isn't just about physical enjoyment. It's also about seeking comfort or relieving tension in our lives. The potentially destructive tendencies of these drives, such as avoidance and rationalization, can interfere with and suppress the generative drive. In this scenario, Conti proposes using introspection and constructive thinking to overcome these tendencies. For instance, if a person keeps postponing an activity they planned, they might be unknowingly employing unhealthy defenses. Conti suggests that this person could use their thinking capacity to evaluate what's happening, and by understanding themselves better, they can bring that process to a healthier place. He illustrates this further with an example of gardening. The process of gardening aligns with Conti's perceived function of thinking when it's in service of the generative drive. The act of planting the garden and reflecting on it not only gives peace, contentment, and delight, but also signifies the growth of generative drives. However, falling into a negative cycle of overthinking or avoidance pushes one towards unhealthy mental states. According to Conti, the beauty of activities like gardening isn't in the thinking, but in the actions that were driven by generative thoughts. The transcript reveals an interesting dialogue around thinking's role concerning the generative drive. Conti deduces that activities like checking social media or texting often serve as distractions, causing individuals to delay their intended productive activities. While it might seem that these distractions are just harmless actions, they serve as defenses, protecting individuals from engaging with something more challenging, thereby limiting the potential stride of their generative drive. Next, Dr. Huberman brings up an essential topic. Being overdriven or having too much of the aggressive or generative drive can lead individuals to have a toxic relationship with themselves or repeatedly run into obstacles. On the other hand, some people might have an apparent low generative drive, with life seeming too hard or work just a means to pay the bills. Conti acknowledges the existence of this continuum of generative drive in humans, stating that it could be a product of a multitude of factors, both intrinsic and extrinsic. However, he asserts that understanding the interplay between cognitive functions and the generative drive helps untangle these complexities, paving the way for healthier mental states and balanced life satisfaction. This segment explores more about the complexity of generative drive variations and how excessive or insufficient aggressive and pleasure drives can lead to destructive or demoralizing behaviors. Dr. Conti suggests that when these drives, particularly the aggressive drive, overtakes the generative drive, it leads to envy, a root cause of destructive behaviors. He cites an example from the movie American Psycho that depicts a man who, driven by extreme aggression and pleasure, developed a strong sense of envy that led to violence and sadism. Conti further adds that no amount of wealth or other attainments can quench such individuals' envy, as it's eternally insatiable. On the other spectrum, when aggression and pleasure-seeking drives are low, individuals may experience demoralization. Lack of assertion or agency can lead to feelings of isolation, vulnerability, and hopelessness. An interesting discussion follows, questioning whether a combination of low aggression and high pleasure seeking can be observed in certain individuals. Dr. Conti affirms this possibility, citing the example of individuals who, despite facing health issues due to weight, continue to indulge in unhealthy eating habits because of the immediate pleasure derived. Their lack of self-assertion and agency prevents them from taking care of themselves, leading to a downward spiral of health and well-being. This state of self-neglect is fueled by a lower degree of aggressive drive, eclipsing the generative drive promoting self-care and well-being. The conversation unravels the complex interplay between aggression, pleasure, and generative drives, asserting that both their excessive or abnormally low presence can undermine the constructive power of generative drive, leading to issues like destructive behavior, isolation, and demoralization. This discussion delves into the human psyche, specifically focusing on demoralization, aggression, and generative drives. Dr. Huberman and Dr. Conti point to the possible consequences when individuals internalize their feelings of isolation or failure, emphasizing the danger of demoralization. Dr. Conti shares his observations about how demoralized individuals often band with others in similar situations, creating an echo chamber of negativity that can exacerbate their shared adversities. This, Dr. Conti asserts, alters societal standards and alters perceptions. Consequently, this conversation shifts to affiliative defense, the act of banding together with others who share a similar plight as a coping mechanism. Dr. Conti suggests that while this strategy can often lead to collective empowerment, it can sometimes take a destructive turn. This occurs when the group endorses negative behaviors, rallying around anger, hatred, or revenge. The key, Dr. Conti suggests, is to guide these individuals towards productive paths, offering them routes to improve their lives and manage their negative emotions. Segueing to the positive end of the spectrum, where a highly aggressive drive rules, Dr. Huberman shares the account of a highly successful individual who uses his aggression to fuel his productivity. He further acknowledges his own struggle with balancing aggressive and pleasure drives early in his career, especially during times of creative friction and tough competition. Both speakers agree that relying purely on an aggressive drive can lead to exhaustion and lack of fulfillment, emphasizing the importance of tapping into one's love for the work or questions at hand. Drawing an important conclusion from their shared experiences, they discuss the destructive potential of letting an aggressive drive eclipse the generative one. Pointing to the example of how competitive aggression could have affected Dr. Huberman's scientific accomplishment, they assert that aggression not only distracts one from the task at hand, but also sows seeds of competition and negativity in one's environment, ultimately undermining collective progress and individual wellness. In juxtaposition, channeling energy and focus through the generative drive can lead to more effective work and make a constructive contribution to human understanding and societal well-being. This insightful exchange emphasizes the importance of maintaining a healthy balance between aggressive and generative drives to improve our psychological state and contribute constructively to society. The conversation explores the importance of understanding the source of one's issues and emotions, rather than simply treating their manifestations. Dr. Conti suggests that we each vary in the amount of natural drive, the underlying motivations and needs forming our behaviors. However, he suggests that life experiences create a shift in these drives, propelling our actions in certain directions. He assures that while an individual's drive may vary, we are still able to moderate and control these drives through our choices, behaviors, and decisions in life. The conversation implicates the idea of self-examination and self-awareness. Seeking insight leads to a more attuned, balanced state of mind. Dr. Conti mentions the concept of the generative drive, suggesting the possibility and need to cultivate it while managing the pleasure and aggression drives. Dr. Huberman shares a personal experience of emotional exhaustion from his postdoctoral years and how conventional medicinal treatment was not the solution. The antidepressant prescribed, instead of addressing the root cause of the exhaustion, made him feel worse. He mentions how this experience led him to find relief through talk therapy and self-care. Though the episode doesn't criticize or disapprove the use of medication, it stresses the importance of understanding and addressing the psychological issues before resorting to medical solutions. Dr. Conti presents the healthcare system's tendency to oversimplify and deliver quick solutions. He shares an example of a patient misdiagnosed as facing chronic insomnia and labeled as prescription seeking. while in reality she was experiencing trauma at home and was terrified of going back. The healthcare system's focus on throughput or quick outcomes often overlooks the necessity of understanding the root cause of the patient's ailments, leading to misdiagnoses and mistreatment. For those feeling disconnected, demoralized, overly aggressive, or unsatisfied, the speakers recommend self-reflection and understanding what one truly wants. By exploring each of these aspects, we can regain control and alignment with our drives, leading us to a state of peace, contentment, and delight. Dr. Conti and Dr. Huberman's conversation sheds light on the different ways in which medication can assist in mental health issues, while emphasizing that it should not be a substitute for understanding the root cause. Dr. Conti suggests that in situations where individuals struggle to overcome their issues to the extent they desire, medication can be employed as an aid for immediate relief. Practical examples include using medication to stop seizures or prevent bipolar episodes, paired with a strong practice of self-care. In instances where anxiety levels impede the processing of trauma, medication can be utilized to take the temperature down. This allows for a more manageable pathway through the therapeutic process, subsequently providing resolution and fostering a healthier mental state. Despite the helpful role of medication, the speakers caution against using it as a substitute for understanding the nature of one's issues, reinforcing the need for self-awareness and self-understanding. In talking about the structure of the self, both hosts discuss components like the unconscious mind, conscious mind, defense mechanisms, self-awareness, behaviors, desires, and a sense of hope. These elements are summarized in a visual framework that provides a pathway to higher levels of self-understanding and subsequently better mental health outcomes. This framework could lead to increased empowerment, humility, agency, gratitude, and eventually peace, contentment, and delight. Looking forward, the speakers hint at further discussion of the framework's relevance in various mental health conditions, both healthy and unhealthy, including narcissism, anxiety, bipolar disorder, and obsessive-compulsive disorders. Dr. Huberman expresses anticipation for the next part of the series, which would hopefully offer a deeper exploration of these mental health conditions under the outlined structure of self. In thanking Dr. Conti, Dr. Huberman expresses appreciation for the insightful framework presented and references a PDF version available for listeners who prefer a visual representation. The aim of such resources is to make these complex ideas accessible and understandable, not only for clinicians and psychiatrists, but for everyone interested in better understanding themselves and their mental health. This dedication to universal understanding underlines the overwhelming sense of empathy and concern that threads through the podcast, preparing listeners for the forthcoming episodes, promising deeper insights and more enriching discussions. Check out the full podcast by clicking the link in the description below. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this. Thank you for listening to this podcast summary episode of the Pod Slice